Well, Dr. Matthew Potter, we're here again this week. I've had to come indoors. The wind is howling around us today a little bit, but nonetheless, we have some very important, I suppose, history to get through in the next 15 or 20 minutes or thereabouts. Today, we're looking at Limerick's Olympians. And I was absolutely amazed, Matt, to find out that we've had 5 gold medals won by Limerick people, and 3 of those were won by just one man as well, who it's only in latter years has been recognised at all.
That's correct. The Olympic Games were revived in 1896 by Baron Pierre de Coubertin, a French athlete and administrator who was very, very interested in athletics and wanted to revive what he thought were the Olympic Games of ancient Greece. Now, when I say what he thought was, he had a very romantic view of the Olympic Games, which had been held in Greece from 776 BC up until the 5th century AD, because what he liked about those ancient Olympics was that all the Greek states, because of course ancient Greece was divided up into numerous states before the Romans took over the whole lot of them, he liked the thought of the fact that the Greek states that were always fighting with each other observed truce during the Olympics, and he thought that that was a model that could be carried into the modern world. Unfortunately for him, of course, the Olympics since 1896, as we all know, have become more a source of friction than of harmony. And in fact, of course, nationalist rivalries have often been a feature of the Olympics. So to that extent, the Baron's dream has been somewhat tarnished, and has been tarnished, of course, in other ways as well, with all the modern scandals over doping and so on. But saying that, it was a very noble dream. I suppose from the Irish perspective, it should be remembered that Baron de Coubertin was very, very pro-British. So whenever there were rows about under the headings under which the Irish athletes compete, he would always have taken the view that Irish athletes, before 1920, obviously, or independence that is, should compete under the British flag. But so the politics, of course, was there from the very beginning. There were disputes about what flag Irish athletes should compete under. Most of the Irish athletes that competed before independence would have competed under the British flag, but a great many competed under the American flag because many of them were resident in the United States. But some of the Irish athletes, of course, took exception to competing under the British flag, and there were a number of disputes down through the years. This was also a feature, of course, of other parts of Europe that were under other countries in Europe that were under foreign domination, such as Finland under the Russians, Bohemia under the Austrians, and so on.
And it was under the US flag, of course, that our most famous son here in Limerick competed and won his medals. Isn't that correct?
That is correct. The golden age of Limerick's participation in the Olympic Games was from 1900 to 1920. And the 1900 Olympics, John Flanagan from Kilmallock won a gold medal in the hammer throw event, and he subsequently repeated this feat at the 1904 Olympics and the 1908 Olympics. Now, Flanagan was from near Kilmallock, from Martinstown. He emigrated to America, became an American citizen, joined the NYPD, and as a policeman had a lot of spare time to train. So during his period in the NYPD, he was able to win, as I said, 3 gold medals under the flag of the United States, 1900, 1904, or 1908. And it wasn't until 1911 then that he actually returned to Ireland, because in 1910 he was actually transferred from his desk job, put on the beat, and he found he hadn't time to train anymore then for the Olympics. So he returned to Ireland. And in 1912 he inherited his family farm, and he remained in Ireland then until his death in 1938. But of course, he is the greatest Olympian in Limerick's history in terms of medals won. 3 gold medals, as I say, 1900, 1904, and 1908. I should point out, of course, that if for the anoraks amongst us, he didn't actually win a medal in 1900. The gold, silver, and bronze medals were only established in the 1904 Olympics held in St. Louis.
Yeah, a fascinating character by all accounts. Do we know anything else about his life? I presume he's buried here in Ireland?
He is. He was a farmer. He was a farmer's son. And as I say, he worked as a policeman in New York. When he returned to Ireland, he resumed farming. And when he died, he was buried locally in his own parish. He seems by all accounts to have been a quiet man, didn't get involved in politics. When there was a row at the 1906 intercalated games, now these were special Olympic games that were held between the 1904 and 1908 Olympics, and this was the first Olympic Games at which the Irish made a formal protest at being counted as being British. But Flanagan had no interest in any of that. He just wanted to compete. I suppose it was easier for him than the Irish-based athletes because he was living in the United States and he competed under the American flag. And of course, it's interesting to know as well, if you look at the local newspapers of the time and the national newspapers, oftentimes Flanagan was described as being American. It wasn't always picked up that he was in fact Irish, although eventually the Limerick newspapers and the Limerick Leader in particular did report him as being a Limerick athlete representing the United States. And when he returned to Ireland, he was given a great welcome locally, and he enjoyed a considerable amount of local fame and acclaim as the winner of 3 gold medals in the Olympics.
But it took almost 100 years on before he was officially recognised in his own
Correct.
parish, isn't that correct?
In 2001, a statue was elected beside Marketown Church of Flanagan. I suppose because it was before independence, because he had competed under the American flag, because the Olympics, of course, at that early stage didn't enjoy the worldwide coverage that they do nowadays. It seems strange to us that a man who won 3 gold medals would be forgotten for many decades, but in reality that's what happened. But in recent decades he has again enjoyed the acclaim that he deserves. And I suppose not only was he the greatest Limerick Olympian of all time, but he was also one of the great Irish Olympians of all time, because very few others won 3 medals. Certainly since independence, the only Irish athlete to win 3 gold medals was Michelle Smith. There was, from memory, I think there was a Mayo athlete who competed under the American flag who won a number of gold medals in the early decades of the 20th century as well. But I think it's fair to say that John Flanagan would be Limerick's greatest ever Olympian in terms of his medal haul.
Our next Olympian that we looked at didn't come from too far away from John Flanagan either. Sure, he didn't. Another Kilmallock man.
You're referring to the Leahy brothers.
Yes.
Yeah. Pat Leahy and Con Leahy. They were born near Brewery, just inside the Cork border. They actually had the good sense to be born in the Limerick side
on
of the
right
border.
Side, obviously. Yeah.
On the right side of the border, exactly. And in the 1900 Olympics, Pat Leahy actually won 2 medals. He won the silver for the high jump and the bronze for the long jump. And his brother Con then, at the 1904 Olympics, won silver for the high jump. Sadly for Con Leahy, his greatest ever Olympics were the 1906 intercalated games, which are no longer counted as official Olympics. I'll just give you a little account of them. When the Olympics were established in 1896, the first games were held in Athens. And the Greeks then, not unnaturally, thought that the games should be permanently located in Athens. The great powers such as Britain and France thought otherwise, of course, and the 1900 Olympics were held in Paris. 1904, they were held in St. Louis as part of the World Fair of that year. But then, to keep the Greeks happy then, in 1906, there were what were known as the intercalated games held in Athens. The idea was that between the Olympiads, there would be these games. As it happens, the 1906 games were the only ones that were ever held, because when it came around again to 1910, Athens wasn't in a position to host these games, and then they were discontinued. But to go back to the Irish participation in these games, it was noteworthy for 2 reasons. One is that Con Leahy won both gold in the high jump and silver in the triple jump. Secondly, it was the first Olympics where there were ever any type of political protest, because Con Leahy and another athlete, a chap called O'Connor, they raised a green flag, an Irish flag of the time, which was, at that time, the tricolour wasn't recognised as the Irish flag. It was a green flag with an Irish harp in it, and they raised this flag at the medal ceremony, much to the annoyance of the British authorities. But the Greek government, which was anxious to curry favour with the British because both royal families were closely related, didn't, of course, entertain any protests on the part of the Irish athletes. But Con Leahy, as I say, sadly for him, he is recognised as having won silver at the 1904 Olympics, but his gold and silver at these games are no longer recognised as official Olympic medals. Although it should be said that there has been a campaign going on for a number of years now to recognise these 1906 Olympics as a proper Olympics, because some experts say that the 1900 and particularly the 1904 Olympics were actually smaller scale events than the 1906 Olympics, and that particularly the 1904 Olympics that were held in St. Louis, neither Britain nor France took part. They were dominated by the Americans, and some would argue that they were more in the nature of a local American Olympics. So perhaps Con Leahy's gold and silver medals in 1906 will eventually be recognised as official Olympic medals again.
The next Olympian that we feature is a man from Athay, and a man who really acquitted himself quite well as well.
That's right, Tim Ahern from Athay. He won gold at the 1908 Olympics in the triple jump. Actually, the 1908 Olympics can be regarded as Limerick's greatest ever Olympics, because John Flanagan won his third gold medal, again for hammer throwing. Tim Ahern, who also won gold for the triple jump, also known as the hop, skip and jump, by the way. And William Russell Lane Joint from Limerick City won silver for shooting. And he was an interesting character as well, in that his father was the only person to be both Mayor of Limerick City and Lord Mayor of Dublin City. And the younger Lane Joint, William Russell Lane Joint, was also a well-known stamp collector. But he was Limerick City. He would have been, generally speaking, a unionist in his political views. So he wouldn't have had as much problem with Tim Ahern as being counted as a British athlete, because Tim Ahern did actually protest at being classified as a gold medalist for Britain. But certainly from the Limerick point of view, the 1908 Olympics were the high point: 2 gold, 1 silver medal.
So our next Olympian was also a South Limerick man, Denis Carey from Kilfinnan.
That's right. He competed in the 1912 Olympics. He was also a hammer thrower, but sadly for him, he came 6th. So he just fell outside the medals. But it's interesting to note that, again, Limerick was consistently represented at all the Olympics during this period. Of course, there were no Olympic Games in 1916. They were scheduled to be held in Berlin, ironically enough. But for obvious reasons, they were not held in Berlin in 1916. So the next Olympics then that to be held were in 1920 in Antwerp.
And these were particularly good Olympics for Limerick people as well, weren't they?
They were. Paddy Ryan from Palace Green represented the United States, actually. But he was, again, a Limerick man, had emigrated to the United States, also worked in the NYPD, which could be described as a nursery, I suppose, of Limerick Olympians. And in the 1920 Olympics, Ryan got gold. He won a gold medal at the hammer throw and a silver throwing the 56-pound weight. And he also returned to Ireland in later years and lived out his life in his native Palace Green. It's interesting to note that all of Limerick's Olympic medal winners have lived in America at some stage, because the Leahy brothers and Tim Ahern, who had been living in Limerick at the time they won the medals, subsequently emigrated to the United States and actually lived out their lives there. Flanagan and Paddy Ryan, on the other hand, were living in America at the time they won their medals, and then subsequently returned to Ireland. So again, I suppose it's a snapshot of the enormous numbers who were emigrating from Ireland during that period. The high point of emigration from Ireland was between 1850 and 1920, and the Limerick Olympians typify that.
Speaking of high points, I suppose the high point for Ireland and its coming out as a nation very much was the 1924 Olympics. And a man who has a lot of connections here to the Markets Field, where I sit today, was the flag bearer for that. And a man, even though there is a monument that most people pass and probably don't even realise what it is or who it's for, a man that contributed an awful lot in terms of Limerick's athletic, and also was the flag bearer for that first Irish flag at an Olympics. Correct. And that was, of course, John O'Grady from Ballybricken.
Correct. The 1924 Olympics, which were also held in Paris, were the first Olympics that Ireland was able to compete as an independent nation. And it was a very proud moment, of course, for the country, and it was seen as such at the time. Now, John O'Grady competed in the 1924 Olympics in the shot put. Unfortunately, he didn't win a medal, but he had the great honour of being Ireland's first ever flag bearer in the Olympic Games. He was born in 1892 in Ballybricken, just outside Limerick City. He was already a man in his early 30s when he took part in the Olympics. Actually, a lot of the Limerick Olympians were relatively mature by the standards of modern Olympians. But the particular sports that they entered, mainly the hammer throwing and the athletics, did allow for more mature men to compete. But he was very much involved in the local athletic scene. He worked as well, of course, at an interesting point perhaps. He worked for the local authority, for Limerick County Council. Died at a relatively young age in 1934. And was the first of the Limerick Olympians to be actually recognised with his own monument. The O'Grady Monument was unveiled only 6 years after his death in 1940. I should have mentioned that Paddy Ryan's monument in Palace Green was erected in 2004. So three of the Limerick Olympians have their own monuments: Flanagan, Ryan and John O'Grady. John O'Grady's monument is very well known, of course, to many, many generations of Limerick people, because it's at the Munster Fair Tavern, just very close to the entrance to Mount St. Lawrence Cemetery, one of the great sites of Limerick, in fact.
Indeed, and we had one more competitor then in the 1920s who competed in 1928 in Amsterdam in the 100 metres, isn't that correct?
That's right. Denis Kostin, who was a medical doctor, belonged to a very well-known Newcastle West family. His nephew will be well known to many people in history and legal circles in Limerick. He would be John Kostin, the well-known.
Who would have championed the cause very much of Lady Heath over the years. Correct. As well. Yes.
Very much so. Very much so. And now Denis Kostin wasn't actually didn't win a medal, but had his own interesting record in that he represented Ireland in the 1928 Olympics, but he was also in the 1956 Olympics, but he was the medical officer of the British Olympics team in the 1956 Olympics, because he spent his entire life living in Britain, in fact. So he also made Olympic history by representing two countries in two different positions, as it were.
A bit of a Jack Charlton type character in that,
exactly.
In that respect.
In reverse.
Yes, so then we have to wait all the way till 1964 in Tokyo to find our next Limerick Olympian.
That's right. This was James Hogan from Croom. He represented Limerick in the 10,000 metres and in the marathon at the 1964 Tokyo Olympics. But he also did a sort of a Jack Charlton, because in the 1968 Olympics he represented Britain in the marathon. Unfortunately, he wasn't placed on either occasion. Then, of course, we're coming up then to the more modern period, of course, where we had Neil Cusick representing Limerick or representing Ireland in the 1976 This is 1972 Olympics in Munich and the 1976 Olympics in Montreal. He competed in 10,000 meters in 1972 and the marathon in 1976.
And of course, Neil would have won the Boston Marathon in between times as well. So very much a well-recognised runner in his own right.
Very much so, very much so.
In 1976, we also had Niall O'Shaughnessy, and he competed in two of the middle distance events, didn't he? The 800 and the 1500 metres.
He did.
Then we have to wait until 1980 for the next Limerick Olympian, and that was Michael O'Shea, and he came 10th in the 5,000 metres at that stage.
He did. He did indeed. Actually, Limerick people have been represented consistently at all the Olympics since 1964. I suppose Frank O'Mara would be unique in that he competed in 1984, in 1988, and in 1992. That was 3 Olympics. And I'm not aware of any other Limerick athlete that competed in modern times, at least, in three different games.
Ger Mullins, of course, was a representative for Limerick in the equestrian, and he would have competed in 2 Olympic Games. That would have been the 1984 LA Games and 1988 in Seoul. So he was on the Irish equestrian team. And of course, another great son of Limerick would have also had ideals on competing in the equestrian, and that would have been the great Jed, and of course he was on the Army equitation.
Major Jed O'Dwyer.
Major Jed O'Dwyer. He would have been on the Army equitation school, and of course Limerick Lace was his famous horse as well. So that goes back to the 1930s. So I think we need to give him a mention in all of this as well.
Yes. Especially I was at school with his grandson, anyway, Jed O'Dwyer of the Herders Pub, so we must give him a mention.
Absolutely, and I had the pleasure of knowing Major O'Dwyer myself many years ago.
Yes.
Barbara Johnson competed in the 400 metres hurdles, and that was in 1988 in Seoul as well.
Yes.
And of course we had Frank O'Mara then again in 92 in Barcelona, those wonderful Olympics in Barcelona in 92. Yes. I suppose Freddie, Mercury and Montserrat Caball.
That's right.
We're coming into my era at this stage.
Yes, that's right, yes.
A man that is no stranger here to the Marketsfield as well, and literally 2 days before he and his lovely wife Sinead Jennings, who's also an Olympian, emigrated to Australia. We had them here in the Marketsfield towards the end of last year, and Sam was of course in the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta, which were a wonderful Olympics as well, and a man that's well known to me as well, and whose family would have great Marketsfield and Mulgrave Street connections, Tom Cummins. Tom, who now of course works in UL. Tom competed in 2000 in Sydney, as well as Rosemary Ryan. She competed in the 5,000 metres. Then of course another great son of Limerick, who has gone on to represent us on much bigger stages almost than the Olympics, in becoming a professional. Isn't that correct? Was our next man in there in Athens in 2004.
Andy Lee, that's right. And again, he would have born in London, but grew up in Castleconnell, and was always very, very proud of his Limerick connections. So I think we have no difficulty at all in claiming him as being one of our great Limerick Olympians.
And then, of course, we have Sam Lynch again, was in rowing in 2004 as well. And then we move on to Beijing in 2008. And Sean O'Neill, of course, another great Limerick rower. Sean was in the Olympics in 2008 and also in London in 2012 in those wonderful Olympics in London.
New Zealand's occasion.
Exactly, absolutely. He had moved on to New Zealand at that point. Fiona Doyle, a swimmer, and indeed I think our only swimmer right across all of the Olympians, the Limerick Olympians. She would have competed in Rio in 2016, and the aforementioned Sinead Jennings, who's a wife of Sam Lynch, or Sam Lynch is her husband, as she'd like to point out. And of course both Sam and Sinead, we send them our best wishes messages if they're watching us, which they very well could, because I know they follow us here in Sporting Limerick. And another lady who is doing very well for in her running, and a daughter of Mayo, but with very, very strong Limerick connections through the Cullinans, is Sinead Diver, and Sinead is running marathons at a ferocious rate, and of course very unlucky, of course, that the Olympics this year has had to be postponed because of the pandemic. But Sinead will be running for Australia next year in the Olympics, and of course has great Limerick connections as well. Matt, it's been wonderful, as always, and I always have a fear when you start doing lists of people that we've left somebody out. I have no doubt that the purists out there are going to find some Limerick connection or somebody that we've missed somewhere along the way. So we'll say E plus OE at this time, I think, would be a good way of putting this. Thanks so much, Matt, as always.
Thanks very much.
And it's been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.